My full name is RaShad Sanders. In this world, there's always been a majority and a minority. There are periods in life where you will experience both ends of that spectrum. You may be aware of it, and you may not. It's up to you to decide how you let those things affect your life and mold you into the person that you will mature and become. Let me share some of my molding experience with you. Majority, minority. Well, what is the majority? I'll make it simple. It's the greater number. Can you think of a time when you were part of the majority from a social aspect and how that made you feel? Personally, it felt good to me. During my experience of being in the majority, I was always finding people who looked like me, thought the same way I did. We had similar styles. We had the same ideals and beliefs. Over 90% of the time, we agreed with each other, and they would back me whether I was right or wrong. One day, I took a mental trip back in time. You should try it sometimes. It's really cool. I call it the hot tub mind machine. When I got there, I asked myself, RaShad, will you always be a part of the majority? Will life always be this easy? Will you be friends with the people in your circle for the rest of your life? Will you always have your needs met socially? Will you always view others outside of the majority the same as you do now? After my mental trip, I realized that life really wasn't easy because despite how good those things made me feel, I was still considered a minority even though I felt like I was in the majority. Growing up was a bit different for me in Michigan before moving to West Virginia. I grew up in a community where pretty much every business owner and professional were a minority. I'm talking about from gas stations, grocery stores, barbershops, my teachers at school, and the list goes on. There was literally one white guy that went to my school. His name was Randy. Randy stuck out like a sore thumb, but that didn't bother him. You know, being raised in that environment really affected me at a young age. It gave me a sense of pride of who I was, RaShad, and where RaShad came from. Like I said, I love being around people every day that like to do the same things that RaShad liked to do. We all hung out at the same places. We played sports together. We celebrated birthdays together, the whole nine. As a kid, that gave me a different perspective. While lots of those things really influenced me, RaShad, I still had that childhood innocence. You know, I was still trying to figure out, was it true that if I held a girl's hand, would I catch cooties? During that period in my life, being a part of the majority gave me the opportunity to view the world in a certain way. Remember Randy? Even though Randy didn't look like us, we never saw color. We never really thought of him as being different or out of place. You know, at the end of the day, we all came from the same neighborhood. We had the same struggles. Each and every one of us we were poor. We were just trying to make it from day to day. A small, tight-knit community with a large majority of minorities. So let's talk about the minority. I'll make this one easy for you, the smaller number. So let's fast forward a little bit in the past in our hot tub mind machine. You can feel free to take this trip with me. This one's for free, but if you want to tip me, I take Zelle, Cash App, PayPal. Sometimes they like to add extra fees. But think about a time, maybe during your early teens, when you felt like you were part of the minority from a social aspect and how that made you feel. Personally, I didn't like that feeling. Now, let me give you some history. One day, my mom came home from the doctor. She sat my sister and I down, and my mom told us that she had been diagnosed with cancer. We really didn't understand at the time how serious that was and how our lives would soon change. My mother rapidly became ill, and my life became really, really hard at home. My stepfather had a lot on his shoulders between work, taking care of my needs and my sister's needs. Bills were piling up. It began to take a toll on everyone. It seems like I blinked my eyes, and my grandparents were there to pick me up. Me and my little sister, I can't forget about her. They came to pick us up so we could move here to West Virginia. Moving from Michigan to West Virginia gave me a crash course in being a part of the minority. I was literally a small sprinkle of pepper in a big bowl of salt. I remember sitting in the office when they were putting together my paperwork for me getting enrolled in my new school here in West Virginia. My grandmother kept saying, "RaShad, RaShad, RaShad." And the admin said, "Well, his paperwork says Harold." Oddly enough, that day I decided to go with being called Harold here in West Virginia. In my mind, it seemed like a less aggressive name. And also, I felt like Harold was a little bit more light in the eyes of people. It was less flavorful, a little bit more bland than the name RaShad. There was this cool moment, I guess, when the admin said, "Well, sweetie, you have the same name as our local newspaper." I said, "It's cool." So eventually a light bulb went off, and I realized that I was no longer a part of the majority, and that was really a hard pill for me to swallow. I'd never seen this type of economic division and difference between people before while living in Michigan. I watched people who looked like me in the minority call other groups names like meathead, the rich kids, stenders, the racists, etc. Those things that they said, I soon would not just be an observer, but a participant. I remember asking myself, "Harold, will you always be a part of the minority? Will life always be this hard? Will I be able to make friends in this new place? Will I ever have everything that I need in life? Will I always view others outside of the minority the same as I do now?" After being a part of the minority for a while, I found myself looking down on people. I would say things to the side. I mean, weird, right? A crazy transition. The way I would interact with them, I would say things like, "Look at the bougie and stuck-up kids. I don't care about their nice cars, their big houses up on the hill. Why do they talk like valley kids?" Those are the things that I would say. Lots of the things I said were triggered from experiences I had here in West Virginia. Being a part of the minority in West Virginia didn't get me the same treatment that it got Randy back home in Michigan. That initially puzzled me and gave me some sense of resentment for this new place I called home. At this point, I wish that I'd never left Michigan. Will you experience being a part of the minority? I don't know. Obviously, the answer for me is yes. Being in the minority can feel awkward at times. I felt like I was around a lot of people who didn't share the same concept of life as me. Numerous encounters gave me a feeling of displacement, which resulted in me, finding methods and strategies to try to fit in with the majority. I needed to learn how to blend in and be a chameleon around these parts, aka West Virginia. Trying to dress like them, find some of the same interests as them, even speak the same way they did. No matter how much I tried to fit in, I could never officially be a part of the majority. The majority was basically a no-go. A sudden change in location and status might not be a big deal to some people, but to me it was a life-changing and life-altering event. How is that? I'm glad you asked. Well, I never experienced a difference in color, race, or quote-unquote status quo before coming to West Virginia. We didn't hear the terms I mentioned earlier where I came from because we were all raised in that same economic class, neighborhood, or hood, as we so affectionately called it. I had a lot of firsts here in West Virginia. West Virginia was the first time I experienced a difference in skin color. West Virginia is the first place I noticed that kids who looked like Harold didn't play sports like tennis, hockey, golf. Only a handful played baseball. It was my first time dealing with nepotism in sports as a child. West Virginia was also the first place I was called a racial slur. Sadly, that was by adults. That experience pushed me deeper into the hole that I was already in. In my heart, I truly felt that if I went by my first name, Harold, it may help me with getting my first job as a teenager. It may help me getting accepted into college. It sounded light when introducing myself to people for the first time, and I just knew that Harold looked good on paper. When I looked at my resume and application for jobs, in my mind I would say, will they bring in Harold or RaShad for an interview? They might think Harold's a white guy. It would not be until later in life in college and post-graduation that I would start to go by RaShad again. My family and close friends have always called me RaShad. It's honestly the name who defines who I am. I had to come to a stopping point and realize that I have to go by the name that makes me feel more comfortable, and confident, not what makes other people feel comfortable around me. RaShad is who I was, and that is exactly who I wanted to be. While the name Harold means army or ruler, the name RaShad means good judgment. My inner being and first name Harold allowed me to become the ruler of who I wanted to be by using my army of smarts, hard work, diligence, and perseverance to make it to the place that I am today. While starting to go by my minority name, RaShad again, it allowed me to balance that weird spectrum and use the characteristics and strengths of my majority name, Harold, but still use the good judgment of RaShad to really excel and empower myself to become the individual that I am today. You know what I realized? It's not like I ever really changed my name. I'm just a current product of both my majority and minority experiences, and I've evolved as an individual. Who am I? I am RaShad Sanders. Thank you.